My body knows how to do it.
It's a girl.
As we speak, every second, a woman gives birth somewhere in the world. It may sound ordinary, but for the woman living it, birth is nothing like that.
Welcome to Born to be Wild, the podcast. We call in guests from Portugal and beyond to share real birth stories and lived experiences, and to explore what maternity care really feels like on the ground.
In this podcast, we invite you to listen, question, and sometimes unlearn what pregnancy, birth, and postpartum are supposed to look like.
For us, wild means staying connected to yourself, your body, and your choices, even when systems make that difficult.
So let's begin.
Another thing that I find through this whole matrescence process is women feel disoriented. There's a real sense of feeling, and I kind of talk about women feeling lost, and I'm kind of like, I don't even know if lost is the right word, but it's more this feeling of like, I just feel disoriented, like where, who am I, where am I? And so it's really about like reorienting a woman.
Hey Afifa, have you ever had a moment during postpartum where you didn't even recognize yourself?
Yeah, where to start? For example, there was this time I remember I was walking across the street with my 1-month-old baby in kangaroo, and someone honked at me. And then I don't know what happened. I just lost it. I started screaming at the car. It was this instant, like a primal urge to protect my baby, and I could feel it in my whole body.
It's like a switch just flips, right? And it's because there is so much happening under the surface. As a new mom, your nervous system is literally being rewired.
Yeah, exactly. And there's actually a word for this entire transformation: the rage, the identity shift, all of it. And it's a word most women have never heard. But the second they do, they finally feel like they can breathe again.
Yeah, that word is matrescence.
Think of it like adolescence that everyone knows, but it's actually for motherhood. And it makes so much sense because there is a biological and emotional earthquake of becoming a mother. And today's guest, Hannah Staunton, she is an expert at helping women navigating that exact process.
Yeah, she really does. Because Hannah is a somatic psychotherapist who understands the why behind those moments where we feel out of control. She talks about why our nervous systems feel so on edge, why birth trauma is so often ignored, and why the real prep work for a baby isn't about the nursery, it's about your own subconscious.
It is so interesting. We could go on and on around this topic. This
Yep.
conversation honestly changed how I look at my own reactions.
Yep. So let's get into it.
Good morning, Hannah.
Good morning.
So good to have you on the podcast today. And before we dive in, can you tell us a little bit about yourself and what brought you to this work you're doing today?
Yeah, of course. So I'm Hannah Staunton. I'm a somatic and yoga psychotherapist. So I blend somatic therapy with some yoga therapy and psychotherapy. And I specialize working with mothers. So I specialize in perinatal therapy, which means supporting women through the rite of passage of motherhood. So this could be the whole way from pregnancy through the birth experience, the early postpartum into motherhood, or it might be that I work with women at different stages of their motherhood journey.
Mm-hmm.
I'm from the UK, but I live in Portugal. I'm a mum. I have an almost 3-year-old boy, and I birthed him here in Portugal. I started off as a yoga teacher. I was also working in the film industry at the time, and I became a yoga teacher. It's something that I practiced since a teenager. And I really realized through that I wanted to work with people in a kind of deeper and more transformative way. I really feel like that is kind of my love language, like supporting people, supporting women.
Yeah.
When I was doing my therapy training initially, I did an additional training in perinatal therapy when I was kind of midway through it. This was before I was pregnant as well, a couple of years before I was pregnant. And I always knew that I wanted to work with women. I always had this feeling in my body, like I want to support women, and I just couldn't quite touch what, like how I wanted to do that. And I did this training and I was just completely blown away by maternal physiology and what happens to a woman's body and brain through this like transition, this transformation. And I'm like a real kind of nerd when it comes to biology and neurophysiology. I really love like understanding how the brain works, and anatomy. And yeah, this just really sparked such a fire in my belly. And then, of course, when I became a mother
Yeah.
myself, I was like, okay, wow, like this is so important. And it just kind of really felt like it like dropped into me. Like
It makes so much sense.
this
Yeah.
is yeah, this is kind of
This is
Yeah.
really where I
it.
feel my work is going. Exactly. And then, yeah, I kind of had that embodied experience. And then after that was like, right, that's where I'm really focusing all of my attention. And I was working with mothers before I was pregnant and when I was pregnant. And then of course, when you have that experience yourself, you're like, okay, that's
But
my
this is
North
Yeah.
very
Star.
interesting because it's not so usual actually to, even before being a mom, being so aware already that there's something's happening here and there's a need for support. How did you get that idea?
Yeah, it's really interesting because, and I shared this actually on my Instagram a couple of weeks ago, and it really resonated with a lot of other women. I actually really didn't feel very maternal before I had my son. I didn't
Mhm.
have this huge pull to like maybe not become a mother, but it was, I think really what it was I didn't have a huge amount of not modeling, but I didn't have a lot of people around me that were mothering maybe in a way that really aligned. And I kind of feel like a lot of the conditioning um, that I experienced and a lot of internalized beliefs that I and other women, of course, experience about becoming a mother didn't sit right with me. It didn't kind of feel like that was something
Mm.
I wanted to do. I
Mhm.
now obviously have realized, like, okay, there's so much more to it. And also, I get to decide what kind of mother I want to be.
Exactly.
So I didn't really have that pull. And then I just, yeah, for some reason I just felt this draw to do this training. I really was like, oh, it'd be really beautiful to be able to support women's bodies through pregnancy. And then what I realized when I did this training, I was like, oh wow, this is actually so much bigger than just
Hmm.
supporting women's bodies through pregnancy, through the practice of yoga therapy and somatic therapy. I was like, okay, my mind has been
Yeah.
completely blown open. And I think that's when I started really understanding the fact that it isn't just a physical change, it's an
No.
emotional, it's a neurological, spiritual, social change. And I was like, whoa, okay. And that's just where it all really landed. And I was like, this is so interesting. And yeah, it just kind of came from there really. And I was like,
Yeah.
wow.
Why do you think women are so poorly prepared for what's to come with motherhood? Is there an answer to it?
I feel that there's often a lot of care for women when they're pregnant compared to when they become a mother. I see this in so many women, including clients, people I know. There's definitely a familiar pattern, generally speaking, that women are more looked after when they're carrying a baby. I don't know if
Mhm.
you've felt that yourself. But
Of
I know that
course, yeah.
this isn't always true. I know in many cultures, England really actually being one of them, that kind of don't really acknowledge mothers in the same way um, that they do with pregnant women. It can even just be as small as not giving a mother a seat on the bus compared to a pregnant woman. And I don't even know if women are, I don't know, looked after when they're pregnant or kind of supported so well for birth. But there's definitely more focus on kind of birth prep than there is for support with a mother's identity transition. I feel like even though there's so many examples of women's power being taken away during the birth process, and that really disempowers women, but because women are incredibly powerful and systems have been kind of threatened by women's power for centuries, right? So I feel like if we were to really support mothers in their identity and their motherhood and they really came into that power, it can feel like quite a threat, you know?
Yeah. You're describing this strange paradox in motherhood where you really go from being the most watched person during the pregnancy, you're in the middle of the room, and then you kind of become invisible. You gave that example in the UK, but actually something that you can experience in many countries where
Yeah.
then there is a label that you join as a mom. And it's really hard to be prepared for this. And Is it something, Anna, that you personally experience as a mom?
Yeah, hugely. I mean, it comes from myself and then also the people in my support system, but then also society and expectations. But I feel like even when I was pregnant, there was a lot of focus on looking after me because I'm carrying the baby. And then often once you've gone through the birth and you're on the other side, everyone again is just really focusing on the baby rather than focusing on the mother. And this, might be completely unconscious. It's not like necessarily an intentional behavior, but mothers are, are so easily made to be invisible or seem invisible that mothers' needs are kind of put to the bottom of the barrel. It's like, we need to look after the baby. And there's so many reasons for that. And women are carrying that in their systems. But it's also just this, the patriarchal system that we're living in of women being less than. And it just becomes so normalized that everyone focuses on the baby. And of course, when you're pregnant, you're carrying the baby. So
Yeah.
everyone's really like, okay, let's look after this glowing pregnant mother that just needs to be nourished. Obviously, that doesn't always happen. But as soon as the baby is here, the attention is focused on the baby. But really what needs to happen is we need to flip that, focus on the mother because she's the one who's supporting the baby. And that's the most important thing. That's basically all my work all my work is focused on.
I think here in Europe, but also in the US, Canada, and many other countries, the emphasis is on bouncing back. As a mother, you need to bounce back. You need to go back how you were, what you were, like what you did before you got pregnant, and all the
Mm.
fun things you did, etc. But I think motherhood is more like an identity upgrade. How can you, as a somatic therapist, combine those two things that society holds for us?
Yeah, so it's really working with the internal experience and the external experience and facilitating people to hold all of this and hold all of these truths. So just touching on what you said around the bouncing back and the expectations that are put on women, on mothers. And this is on women before they're mothers and then it's when they become a mother. The society has constructed all of these expectations and ideas of how mothers should be, how they should act, how they should look, like everything that we've been taught through the media, through film, through patriarchal structures. So there's no winning. We're kind of set up to fail, really. We can't
Yeah.
do anything right. And from my perspective, there is never a going back. I think is always a kind of moving forward. And I think this
Hmm.
idea of going back is where a lot of women can feel a lot of resistance and a lot of struggle because they're kind of stuck between identities. It's this whole process that matrescence is of moving from non-mother to mother. And that's what I'm really guiding people through. And this process can take a really long time. It can take years. It's a huge identity shift and transition that doesn't just, happen just because the baby's suddenly here.
Hmm.
And I feel that that's where there can be some real internal conflict. And I actually said this to a friend yesterday because she was trying to explain what this felt like in an Instagram caption. And I was like, babe, you're in the birth canal still. Like you literally are. And I felt like that. Like you are being born as a mother and you feel like you're stuck in the birth canal for a really long time. And you're like, oh, this is uncomfortable. I've
Yeah.
been in here for a while and I don't know who I'm going to be on the other side. And that can feel like a really beautiful process. But it's like, any kind of real identity transition and some big transition in life, it's uncomfortable.
Anna, you mentioned the word matrescence. Let's just do a little pause on this word because, yeah,
Mm.
it's a word that I personally learned when I became a mom for the first time, but I never heard about it before. But I feel it's such an important one because it shows what is the birth of the mother. Maybe if you can tell us a little bit more about what it means and how do you saw mom's experience in it.
Yeah, it's such an amazing word because it just really encapsulates this whole experience. For me, it means the biological, psychological, social, and spiritual transition that women go through when they go from being non-mother to mother, or maiden to mother, if you're familiar with that archetype. And I think this was something in the UK media that there was this big campaign recently to get the word matrescence put into the English dictionary.
Yes, I
Because
did see it. Yes, it's
did you
amazing.
see it? So good, because it doesn't it? You type it, big red line comes up underneath it, and you're like, "Why is
Yeah.
this not you're telling me that this doesn't exist? Excuse me? How dare you?" And I feel like it's a relatively new term, but I think it's so important because it's one word that just encapsulates this whole, like, metamorphosis
Yeah.
that a woman goes through. And I just feel that, like, the work that I'm doing and just, through this concept of matrescence is so important because it helps women understand the process they're going through, which takes away a lot of these conditioned beliefs, these internalized concepts, and actually just like throws them out the window so they can just be like, oh God, what a relief.
Yeah.
Men need to, understand this as well. And also, it just really creates like a lot of self compassion for mothers. Like, a lot of the things I really love to teach, I find so many people are like, oh, wow, like now I really understand that this is just like a biological process. And I can find so much more self compassion for my experience because
Yeah.
it's not just about me. So many of my clients, like even yesterday, I had a client, she was like, oh, I feel like I'm the only one who experiences this. And even I
Hmm.
had those thoughts. And it's kind of mad to think that because think of all the women in the world. Like, of course, someone else is going to have that shared experience. But it's like, just really making people aware that this is such a shared experience. And of course, it's unique to every single person. Everyone will experience different parts of it in their own unique way through their own filter, through their own culture, their past experiences. But it just is quite like it can really feel like a huge exhale.
Can imagine. Hey, and you don't become a mother overnight. It's a process and it can take a while before you can really feel like a mother. Well, I'm 6 years in and I'm still learning and I'm still sometimes like, huh? Really? Me? I'm a mom? But I was also wondering, how does becoming a mother not only change the way of thinking, but also the woman's nervous system?
Yeah, so essentially, when you're pregnant and when especially postpartum, your nervous system becomes much more sensitive, okay? Which, of course, when we think about it, makes complete sense. Your threat detecting system increases because everything biologically, such a primal response, everything is geared towards you keeping this newborn baby
Yeah.
alive. You even have parts of your brain, like neural pathways, will atrophy. You have, parts of your brain that reduce so that you can just really focus on your baby, like parts that are responsible for social cognition. When you're having a, a coffee with someone and you've got quite a young baby and they're talking, you literally cannot understand, not listening to anything they're saying. All you can focus on is on your baby's needs. Because, of course, otherwise we wouldn't survive as a species, would
Yeah.
we?
Yeah. Yeah. Makes perfect sense.
What you were describing just remind me of a scene where I was maybe 6 weeks postpartum and I was baby rearing and feeling super peaceful in the street. And then suddenly a car honked right next to us. And before I could even think, I just lost it. Like I screamed at the
Mm,
driver. And it was like, it was a primal rage. And yeah, it
yeah.
made me realize like how much, I guess, as you say, I was super sensitive. My nervous system has changed. And it was not just me protecting myself, but really like I was like a shield literally for my baby. And oh gosh, people must have felt I was really crazy mom. Poor baby in this
Oh,
kangaroo.
yeah.
Yeah, it makes complete sense. And so, this threat detecting system increases, especially early postpartum. It also does during pregnancy. And so, therefore, women are in a greater state of sympathetic arousal, which just essentially means that they'll be more hypervigilant. They'll be looking for threats more frequently. So, of course, this impacts a woman's nervous system. Everyone's nervous system is so unique and different because of their past experiences. And so some women will experience this hypervigilance more so than others. But essentially, that's what you're doing. And, the outside world and how we live isn't geared to support mothers generally and
I know.
families. So there is a lot of threats out there. And that's the thing as well. It's like differentiating between real threats and perceived threats. And
Mm,
quite often, women will then get into a bit of a loop where perceived threat, like they're constantly perceiving things as threats when they're not. And then they come in, they'll get into a state of chronic nervous system, like sympathetic arousal, which of course is like, it's activating anyway, it's
yeah.
stressful and anxiety inducing anyway, being a constant caregiver. And then you have this biological response on top of that. And that's why I really work with the maternal nervous system and supporting it in a very unique way, because it's just not the same. It's a different ball game. It's not the same as supporting someone who isn't a mother.
Can you give an example of how you support that nervous system?
Yeah, of course. I mean, first of all, I start off with just really, really grounding. Like, I will always start women off with just grounding and just being here and orienting themselves. Sometimes the most basic practices are really where you need to begin with the nervous system, because sometimes women don't even breathe properly. They can't even feel their body in space because they're just constantly on the go. They're rushing, they're really in their minds. So I really start off by just getting people to orient themselves. I really like using eye movement, because when you do really slow eye movement from one side to the other, it mimics when we were, living more in tribes. And we used to scan the horizon, for threats.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's how I really start off. And then there's lots of other different things that I do that are
Being
kind
grounded.
of deeper somatic. A lot of people confuse it with being calm all the time, and just being in like a parasympathetic state. So like rest and digest, really calm, constantly just being like peaceful. No, 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 no. Like nervous system
No.
regulation is about feeling the full spectrum and being able to come back to baseline. It's about fluidity in the nervous system. So being able to feel big things, but knowing that it doesn't take forever to come back to that state of like, okay, I feel regulated. And it's just about growing your
Exactly.
capacity. So it's about feeling the rage. I talk a lot about mother rage as well,
Yeah.
because it's so powerful to actually process that. And, there's like healthier ways to feel mother rage. Necessarily suggest that people are just rageful all the time, of course, but it's about really feeling all the different parts of that spectrum of emotions
Mm.
and whatever it is. So yeah, it's a very important distinction.
When a mother comes to you to see you as a therapist, what is usually the pattern? Like, is there like topics that comes again and again that make those mother really need you during this period?
Yeah, so it's so interesting. I've, like, really been reflecting on this a lot actually in the last 4 to 6 months, to just really see how I can support women better. And it's just such a range of things. But, really, I mean, at the heart of all of it is, is this matrescence process. It is about like this identity process, and then everything kind of sits underneath that. But I really do feel like the most common things are just, the nervous system stuff, just feeling really, really dysregulated and finding that just really hard to navigate. And a lot of it really, when I kind of really touch into it, I think a lot of women are struggling with self-trust, something I really struggled with
Mm.
as well. Like this deep feeling of I know myself and I trust myself in whatever this is, whether it's how I want to birth, the birth process or experience that I had, how I want to mother, how I can be in relationship, make, the discernment of the things that come up and this kind of self-questioning. And it always just comes back to this like feeling of like, do I fully trust myself in whatever it is that I'm experiencing? And often this really can be shattered from the very first experience of becoming a mother, which I mean, conceiving is the first experience, but through the birth process, I feel a lot of women really lose that trust in themselves because of something that happened through birth.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that's what we talk a lot about on this podcast.
Yeah.
And also about the positive experiences, but of course also the negative ones. And in your experience, how often does like the negative experiences, or maybe we can call it birth trauma, go maybe unrecognized or unnamed?
Yeah, I think it happens a lot. I don't know for sure because I don't work within like the medical institution. I'm, close to what's happening, but from my experience, when women have come to me, they have rarely been asked about their birth experience when they go to a doctor or a GP or whoever, and they are then diagnosed with some sort of maternal health condition. And it's just blows my mind. It completely blows my mind. Women are often diagnosed with postpartum depression or anxiety, first of all, without even being asked about the context in which they're mothering in. You know, do they have enough support? What's their support structure like? Are they sleeping enough? Are they eating enough? You know, like
Yeah.
who is actually looking after them? Because if they don't have that, of course they're going to feel depressed and anxious. Like, what do we expect, right? It's madness. Like, as if we want to just stick a label on them and then make them feel like a failure. It actually really enrages me. But often they're not even asked about their birth experience, not even once.
Yeah.
And of course, so many women, whether or not they had a, traumatic, like quote unquote traumatic birth experience or just a really challenging one, it's a huge experience. Even if they had a really positive one, it's such a huge experience. I had one client that I worked with for years, and she had a really empowering birth experience, but that was something that we even really worked with because she was like, I can't understand how I've experienced something so profound. How am I supposed to integrate that into my life? And it's quite
Mhm.
similar to when people have, really deep experiences through using psychedelics or like a near death experience. And it takes you to almost like a completely different place because that's what happens in birth, We're in our primal brain. We're like in a completely altered state. So because of that, things, imprint in our nervous system and our body deeper because we're kind of more open, for want of a better word. And so no matter what experience you had through birth, it's so big that it's so important to have that time and care and level of presence to process and properly integrate that. It's mad. And I think that's the thing. A lot of the time, women actually are traumatized. And also, trauma is really subjective. One
Yeah.
woman will experience something as traumatic, and the same person can have the same experience and it won't be. Of
Yeah.
course, because they're a unique person.
Something that you talked about, Anna, that I found was really interesting is that we tend to put a title on postpartum depression, where sometimes just the lack of support or matrescence or everything that's happening in our body.
Yeah, I mean, I was just going to go on to say about there was a few things which interject if you don't want me to talk about this. But first of all, I think it can also go unrecognized birth trauma because some women don't want to even admit that their birth was traumatic or even close to traumatic, because it creates a lot of failure, feelings of failing, and it can also like tarnish like a really sacred experience. So sometimes women are actually holding this in and then it's not recognized by the people around them.
When I speak to Portuguese women or women around me, it's like, baby is healthy, I'm healthy. I
Mm,
guess it went all fine.
And
yeah.
also
And
the
they
doctor must have known best, so it's fine. But
exactly.
I also have the feeling deep inside they know things that could have got done differently.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly, because it's like what is their what is their concept of fine? What is their concept of a good birth? What is their concept of an empowered birth? Because if they're going into it thinking, a certain way of birthing is the right way to do it, then they're like, oh well, I did it right, but they could have actually had a much better experience. And the thing is, it's like there is, of course, there's no right way to give birth. There is absolutely no right way to give
Yeah.
birth. It's the way that feels most congruent and true for
Yeah.
the woman who's birthing. People can have an incredibly empowering C-section because they've chosen to do that and they've had their autonomy, their agency. But it's the moment that a woman has her agency taken away from her during labor and birth that often creates the trauma because then she goes
Yeah, this is
into
a shift.
an experience of feeling
Yeah.
unsafe, feeling like
Mhm.
she's not necessarily in control, because I don't know if you can ever be in control of birth, but it's that sense of I'm making, these decisions with my birth partner. I'm being consulted about things and I'm making an informed choice. And that's the thing, when the choice is taken away, that's often where women, experience significant birth trauma because it's not always just about how the baby is born that's that's traumatic, is it? It's the
Yeah.
feeling tone that's created in the woman. It's the feeling that they have about that birth. So, like, for example, with my birth, like on paper, would I call that a traumatic birth? It's hard to say. Yeah, I found it really difficult because I was taken away from a safe place, which was my home, and I went to a hospital where I was treated really badly. That immediately made me feel like super unsafe. It made me feel like I'd done something wrong. I was questioned, I was separated from my partner. And then my actual birth experience was fairly positive. It was definitely not how I wanted to give birth, but I
Oh, yeah.
felt more like, quote unquote, in control of the situation. I felt like I was making choices. And then after, and this is also a really important point, the immediate after experience after birth is so important because when someone goes through an experience like that, it's about the immediate aftercare, and that can
Mm.
change everything. And if you don't get that really attuned presence and like deep level of care in those hours, those days after, that can change everything. And that was actually the thing that made my birth experience traumatic in my system, was the fact that straight after, about an hour after, my partner had to go home. I was on my own in a public hospital in a room with two women who were FaceTiming their family at 2 o'clock in the morning. There was
Mm.
bright lights. I I was already processing, what had happened around going to the hospital, being treated badly, leaving a hospital and going to another one. So I was already holding that in my nervous system. I couldn't rest and I was forced to stay in the hospital and I wanted to go home. And they
Yeah.
wouldn't let me go home because of this Portuguese law that doesn't actually even exist. And I then was verbally abused by a pediatrician who shouted at me because I asked to go home multiple times. And that was when I felt so unsafe, and my whole body was just shaking the whole time, and I
Mm.
just felt so protective of my son, and I felt I was in, Portugal's my home, but it's not it's not where I was born and raised. It's still a foreign country to me. And yeah, that was the thing that created actually so much
Something was really
unsafety in my
wrong.
nervous system.
So
Yeah,
Yeah.
understandably, because someone shouted at me.
Wow.
what you mentioned, and as well raise again this conversation and a debate around the importance of having midwives coming to your place, coming to your home after the birth. And it's something that is common in many European countries and doesn't exist here in Portugal. So the women in postpartum are really left alone in whether they are healthy, but also sometimes they're experiencing pain, a lot of blood loss, and just like they need support and help for everything really during this period of time. So I
Yeah,
think this is relating to what society is able to offer to those moms.
Yeah,
exactly.
exactly. Because that's the most important thing. Like, even if someone has a traumatic experience and they have a traumatic birth, if they get the right attuned care just after, that can change everything.
Yeah.
Like, that actually can completely transform the experience. But it's really important that it happens just after, because that's when, the nervous system is trying to kind of make sense of it all. It's trying to complete this fear response in the body, essentially. And if you actually have someone who can really support a mother and really understands how to work with that, that can completely change everything. And, birth trauma can last a lifetime. So,
Yeah.
if we actually do that work just after, it's actually life changing. It's quite literally life
Mhm.
changing because some women will live with birth trauma in their nervous system, in their body, in their mind for their whole life, potentially.
Yeah.
Mm.
Hey, and for pregnant women listening now, maybe pregnant women who are gonna have their first kid, but also second, third, fourth, maybe. What is the thing they can do to prepare for these kinds of situations?
I think women should prepare for postpartum so much more than anyone ever realizes.
Mm.
I think, if anything, it's more important than when you're pregnant. Like, the baby's
Yeah.
here. It's, so much more destabilizing. I think that is one of the most important things, just really, really making a plan for the postpartum to really, really support women getting that a level of attuned care. So whether it's a postpartum doula or a midwife who is able to sit and just really see and witness and acknowledge a woman in the experience that she just had, or someone like myself who works, as a therapist, but also doing it in a really beautiful ceremonial way as well. I really like to bring in a lot of ritual into my work because it is a spiritual process as well as a cognitive and physical one. Because, a lot of the time, the partner or even immediate family members, they can't hold that, and they shouldn't be expected to either, like, unless you just have someone who is, really skilled and already maybe even works in a similar field that's able to really hold a woman through that process. A lot of partners and mothers or fathers-in-law, etc., and people in the extended family, like, they just don't know how to hold that. And I think that's where women can really feel a sense of like not being acknowledged, not being seen, not being heard, and just having that space for them to process that experience is really, really important. And of course, there's so
Mm,
many things that you could do to prepare for the actual birth itself. And there's lots of things that I do when I work with pregnant women. And it's about, really holding both truths of I'm going to prepare as much as possible through supporting my body, really preparing my mind, really diving into all my subconscious beliefs around what I expect from this birth experience, and also my partners because they're bringing all of their their stuff into the birth portal
yeah,
as well. But it's holding, the preparation and the surrender as well, because it
exactly.
it is a process of surrender. You can also never know where it's going to go. So it's, holding both of those
Yeah.
truths at the same time. But I really feel like the immediate after postpartum, like the early postpartum, because I also feel like postpartum is so much longer than what people talk about. It's not the six
Yeah.
weeks after birth,
No.
at all. It's the early postpartum, I like to call it. Is yeah, it's just I really feel like that's such a key time to really work through that birth experience, because otherwise I just see it a lot, like things that have come up in the birth and the early postpartum just ripple out into a woman's experience of early
Mhm.
motherhood.
And being a first time mom, you clearly can't really know what to expect. You don't know how you are as a mom, how you will feel, how birth will be. So, what's the one thing first time moms can prepare for? Like, what can they do, like, for example, today to prepare for a postpartum?
Mm. Such a good question. A lot of women get into a pattern, and this can happen even really in early postpartum, about the feeling that they need to like sacrifice themselves for their baby. And that can stem from so many different things. But really doing this deeper subconscious work around like what are the beliefs that I'm holding around birth, around motherhood? Where did these come from? Can I rewrite and reprogram some of these beliefs so that you're, living and operating more in alignment to what you actually believe rather than
Hmm.
what's just been
Hmm.
programmed through your own upbringing, like what you've been modeled from your own mother and even her mother and just the rest of society, and actually being like, okay, what's true for me? Because a lot of women will be holding that in their subconscious mind without even really knowing it, and then people get into patterns of like, oh, I must sacrifice for my baby. That's just such a common one. And then they don't look after themselves. Everything is geared towards looking after the baby, and then their needs are at the bottom of the barrel. And like, a lot of the time I'm working with that with my clients.
Hmm.
I've had to go through this process myself where I've been like, wow, how have I got into this pattern of like putting my needs last and trying to flip that, and actually changing that when you've created more of a real deep entrenched pattern for so long as a mother is harder, isn't it? Whereas I think if you're doing that before, that can really change things. Also about birth. That's why I
Yeah.
really like to go into a lot of these things before women even go through the birth experience when they're pregnant.
Yeah.
What do I really believe about birth? And actually just being really honest with what that is. What have I been told about birth? Because most people have a deep fear of birth. Most women
Yeah.
fear birth because of what we've been shown. So they're holding that as well.
Yeah. Yeah, it goes so much further than doing the meal train, etc., which is also really important to have the support network. But and it can also have an underlying belief, like, oh, I have to do this all alone, and then you have a meal
Yeah.
train and you don't have to do it all alone, you know?
Yeah.
So that's great,
Exactly.
but I think the questions you mentioned, yeah, please share them with us so we can share them with the audience, and, it's really, really interesting what you're saying. It's like when you give birth, you don't only give birth to a baby, but you also give birth to a mom, and I think that's a really important message to spread.
Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. And, all of these pieces that I was just talking about, as I said, they kind of evolve over time. And I don't think you can necessarily unearth all of it to be ready to be a postpartum. Like, oh, great. Yeah, I'm ready to be a mum. Like, of course, it's an evolving process.
Yeah.
But it just helps to have that level of inquiry, like self-inquiry, just almost like prevent those patterns of I have to do everything on my own and I can't ask for help. And then mothers are burning out. Like society's told me that I should be able to do this on my own. It's the most natural thing in the world to become a mum. It's the most natural thing in the world to birth.
Mhm.
So then they're just internalizing the failure when they realize they can't do it on their own because
Yeah.
of course they can't. It's never been a job for one,
No.
it takes a village to raise a baby and a mother.
Yeah.
On those beautiful words, thank you so much, Hannah, for accepting our invitation, for sharing with us all this wisdom. I hope people listening will go back with first a new word in their dictionary, matrescence, but also
Yeah.
uh, asking themselves the right questions. And we will share to everyone listening the resources you want to share, all the good links to your work. That is very
Yeah.
important. So thanks again.
Thank you, Hannah.
Thank you so much for having me. I could talk about this all day. So I appreciate it and I appreciate being here with you both.
Thanks for listening to Born to Be Wild, the podcast. If you want to continue the conversation, you can find us on Instagram at borntobewild.pt and Birth Mode. We would love to hear from you.
All sources and references mentioned in this episode are in the show notes below. And if you enjoy this episode, of course, please share it with someone who needs to hear it. It's really the best way to help us grow. See you next time!